For whoever is here for these office hours, we got quite a few questions about a variety of Bazel related things and how to use DevZero effectively if someone is trying to do remote Bazel build, remote Bazel execution, both to support local developers as well as for things like CI, etc. Um, Before I get into all of that, a little bit about DevZero. We are a company that provides engineering teams with development environments. And today, before I get into all of the Bazel related stuff, I'm actually going to cover two other concepts first. First is the concept of a recipe and what that actually means, and then what we call workspaces, how those things actually work. For all intents and purposes, uh, the types of engineers that would benefit the most from this office hours today are folks like platform engineers, people that are supporting internal developer teams, etc. Let me get started. Because more recently, I've been getting a lot of questions around Bazel. I'm actually going to start with this recipe over here. Let me increase the size of the screen a little bit and I'll click edit over here. So it's very simple. We are going to start with this project called Build Farm, open source project, and ultimately Build Farm exposes a bunch of gRPC endpoints that allow you to use it as a remote cache or for remote execution, so on and so forth. I have a few shells open over here that I'll jump into after. But if you look at this recipe, there are a few components. Over here, we have this one called packs. There's the build component, and then there's the launch component over here. So what do these mean? Packs over here is ultimately an easier way to do build steps. This one over here is going and installing Helm inside when this recipe gets built, as well as the Kubernetes one says I need things like kubectl. The launch step, I'll go into when that's executed right after, but ultimately the overall theme is build, packs, etc. These all get built into an OCI compatible image when you build this recipe. After the recipe is ready, it gets pushed somewhere. And when I launch workspaces from it, when the workspace is starting up, that is when launch steps get executed. In this case, there's a Helm upgrade, and it just essentially goes and runs Bazel build farm, which is a public chart. So first thing, just hit save and build. A bunch of logs are going to stream out. In this case, I had obviously built this or an iteration of this recipe prior. Therefore, over here, you'll see most of these build steps, everything is going to get cached, and that's why it was that fast and just showed up in 9 seconds. So now, from this recipe, I have actually already gone and deployed a workspace. So the workspace, this recipe change button, it showed up because I just rebuilt the thing. So I have a running workspace called Dominant Stallion QXTK. Let me take this connect command and let me copy that over. So the other thing over here is in order to connect to these DevZero environments from my shell, ID, etc., I need to have the DevZero CLI tool. There are some installation steps over here on how you can install it, regardless of whether you're on Windows computers or like Mac, Linux, etc. I won't spend any more time on that aspect. So then I'll go in. I already had a shell session connected to that machine that I had removed. Let me reconnect to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm inside some arbitrary workspace. Let me first run kubectl get pods -a, because clearly in my recipe, I had a step that as part of the launch steps would go and run Bazel build farm. Indeed, some of these things have been running. In this case, they've been running for 57 odd minutes. So now how do I actually go and use this? Maybe for this engineer, obviously you don't want everyone to go and run their own build farms necessarily. If that's what you want to do, that's great. But I suspect that's not what you'd want to do. I'm just going to run this one command. We're doing a few more networking things to make this a little more ergonomic, but for now, this will suffice. So I just go and run a kubectl port forward. What does this command do? This makes it so that this service that we have called Bazel build farm for server, port 8980 for that is getting exposed on port 8980 on my current dev box. So this is dominant stallion QXTK. So port 8980 on the zero interface for this machine, you should now have Bazel build farm server available on it. Why this is important is as follows. Let me go to the next step for a second. Let me do dz net status. This command ultimately, again, requires a DevZero CLI, but with DevZero, we run a WireGuard network, at least one for every single team. As part of this, all of the endpoints, the WireGuard endpoints that a team might have, so that might be a workspace, various things in the Kubernetes cluster, various laptops, etc., start to become available on the network. That's how when I did that DZWS connect, that SSH connection actually happened over our WireGuard network as well. Why is this important? Fundamentally, because we don't want to be opening up different firewall rules in a variety of places, and WireGuard makes these sorts of network connectivity really ergonomic. I'll hit it. So I was in the computer called Dominant Stallion, and this is obviously my local computer. And as you can see, it's active, and I'm connected to that machine right now. So this is a high-level view of, okay, I'm still on my local computer, but I have some visibility with Dominant Stallion QXTK. For the next, so we have covered a few components so far, talked about what this recipe thing is. It's just a simple YAML interface with which you can go and build workspace images or recipe images. And when you launch a recipe, you get these workspaces, and a workspace comes with at least one Kubernetes cluster. And then there's this WireGuard network that that essentially connects everything together. So now I am going to try to run a few builds. And in order to do that, let me first go into this other computer called Best Mink. So I'll again do DZ workspace connect Best Mink. Excellent. Let me jump over to, again, I didn't want to do anything terribly complicated today. I just wanted to show more of the various interactions. Bazel obviously has quite a few very nice examples. So there's this repo called Bazel build examples, which I have already cloned over here. So ls, I see everything. Very similarly, I have the same repo available on my local, and I have opened it up in my local VS Code here as well. Of course, with any DevZero environment, I'll just get out of this one second to demonstrate a capability. I can do DZ workspace code, and immediately that same workspace would open up in my locally running VS Code. It's just in a different tab, and it's mostly the reason for showing that is to show the ergonomics. I'll get back in here. Run clear, see the examples. Okay, now let's get started. I'm going to start with things on my local. CPP tutorial, stage 1. Obviously, all of the installation, etc. stuff that has already gotten done. Let me cd into that directory and run a Bazel build. First, I need to verify if I truly have Bazel installed. In my recipe, I did install Bazel, and I essentially copied those steps from our documentation. There's a lot of other tools, etc., etc. Everything at its core. This is an Ubuntu machine, so you can install whatever you can on an Ubuntu machine. Which excellent. So it's here. The next thing I want to do is cd into that directory of CPP tutorial stage 1. Let me go in here. There's a module.bazel file, main build. So this is the build Bazel file. So over here, it says that the target's called hello world, and the sources that it's using is hello world.cc, which is this file. Doesn't do a lot, just says hello world. Great. Let me go to the script, copy that command, run it. So Bazel will find that target, figure out wherever the local Bazel server is, and just run it. Right now, it's doing all of the builds locally. It's using the local Bazel cache. For the next examples, I'll actually talk about how you can use a remote Docker Bazel build or a remote Bazel cache. And we'll go into some of those details. We'll also talk about where exactly in the world those things are running. Let me run the next command now. So note, I'm still inside a remote DevZero workspace. When I switch over to my local computer, I'll be sure to call that out as well. So the next one is in CPP tutorial stage 2. So let me get out, cd CPP tutorial stage 2, run the Bazel build command again. Again, it should just run. Everything is happening locally from within the best Mink context. And maybe in this case, I can go and look for the Bazel binary that was created, main, I believe it's called hello world. I run it, says hello world, nothing surprising. Now let's try out what happens when I use the remote execution. So when we were in dominant stallion QXTK, inside of this workspace, I did the kubectl port forward so that I could forward this Bazel server, port 8980 on this one, to 8980 on my local. Therefore, 8980 on dominant stallion QXTK should now be our Bazel build farm server. Let me copy that line, run. Excellent. In this case, it actually seemed to run quite a bit faster, as you can see, which shouldn't be surprising using a remote execution machine. Similarly, I can go and do this. Again, runs incredibly fast. And if I want to go and run the binary again, it's exactly the same. So as you can see, things work pretty much as you would expect. And again, there's nothing fancy going on. So this was at 15, 13, 25. This is 15, 12. So it's literally going and rebuilding the binaries this fast. Now, a lot of us might not want to use a remote development environment for a variety of reasons. And we might just prefer your local computer, regardless of dot files, this, that, and the other. All of that works in a remote environment that you can connect an IDE to, but for whatever reason, we might not want to use it. In order to look at that, let me jump into my local now. I am going to go into examples, clear. So now I'm inside this directory. I am going to first go and run this. So I'm in stage 2 now. Then I won't run that command anymore. Let me just use the remote cache to see if Bazel is truly using all of these or serving up all of these cached artifacts really fast. Like in this case, obviously, in the first instance, we saw it took 5 seconds. In the second instance of using remote execution, it took 0.313 seconds. And in the last case of using a remote cache, it took only 0.09 seconds. So I'm going to use remote cache first. Spell it correctly, Bazel build. Excellent. So we actually get a similar speed from my local computer as I got when I ran the command on a DevZero workspace also. Now let me use the remote execution. We would expect to see, again, equally fast speeds. Now, so, okay, what did we just demonstrate? I'm on my local computer, but I'm using a remote Bazel execution or remote Bazel caching that is running inside of a DevZero workspace directly within a Kubernetes cluster. I'll go into more details about the Kubernetes cluster after this. So CD, let's go into stage 3 this time. And again, I will just go and run these commands directly. So the first time it's remote execution, the second time it's remote cache. We should be able to see both of those outputs immediately. All right. Oh, some error. Okay, it seems like on my Mac, I probably need a couple of need to find some way of supporting some of these flags. But again, if I have that already set up, it should just work. For the next bit, let me actually go back to this one, cd dot 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 dot. I'll hit clear again. And maybe in this case, I can, since I just wanted to go and open up the binary, and since that didn't work for stage 3, let me just go and run it for stage 2. So at least we can say, okay, 8:16, that's the time on my local machine. So again, this is when the thing was built. So now while I'm on my local, I was using this thing called dominant stallion. And from here, I showed that there was a Kubernetes cluster, etc. available. Let's say for whatever reason, you want to interact with this Kubernetes cluster from your local computer, that helm install command or whatever else. I don't use a lot of local development, so I don't have things like Helm on my local, but at least I'll be able to show you if you have those things, how you can use it. So I'll go in here. Let me run the DevZero command first. So there's this DevZero workspace list command, which will again show me, okay, there's this thing called dominant stallion, which is using the build farm recipe. Okay, things are good. Now there's another command over here called DZ cluster. So with DevZero, let's run this command first. DZ cluster, there's create, delete, kube config, and list. We try to make it very easy for people to go and spin up Kubernetes clusters. Yes, of course, on your local, you can use things like Minikube, K3s, etc. And in a remote world, you can obviously have a Kubernetes cluster running on some server somewhere, as well as getting things like EKS, or the Elastic Kubernetes Service, GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine, or whatever it's called, and the same from Azure. And most clouds out there have their own flavor of Kubernetes. But oftentimes, those can be pretty heavy, and like ultimately, it takes a little bit of time for those to get spun up. I'll show a little thing over here wherein you can just, an end user, any end user, depending on however the platform engineering team decides to configure DevZero, every engineer can go and spin up their own Kubernetes clusters pretty much on demand. And it'll take between 30 to 60 seconds for these to come up, generally speaking. And DZ cluster create, all the engineer has to specify is where in the world they want to have their cluster running. So the dominant stallion one over here, it says it's in Portland. So I can do DZ cluster list and Portland. So clearly dominant stallion must be running in this Kubernetes cluster over here. And how can I verify that? I can do DZ cluster, which has an alias of C, kube config. So this is going to, let's see, DZ cluster. I spelled kube config incorrectly. This gives me the kube config. I can run update kube config over here, and it does something very similar to what, let's say, an AWS CLI tool, etc. would do. It went and updated my local kube config, and so now I can set, let's see, if I run kube context, it says I'm on 9.7. If I scroll up over here, 9.7 is indeed my Portland cluster. I use this tool called K9s. So now I'll use K9s to open up the cluster again from my local computer. And clearly, I can see a bunch of pods, etc. running over here. Bestmink was one of the computers I was in, as is Dominant Stallion. Obviously, I'm in the default namespace right now. I'll hit 0 so that I can see all pods across all namespaces. And indeed, Bazel build farm, including Redis, etc., etc. Everything is now running on DevZero's computers. Now, someone might be like, hey, this Redis, okay, sure, we are running it inside just one pod. What if I want to run a different sort of a database or something similar? I will now go into the console. So in DevZero, we look at storage in a couple of different ways. The first one is, let me cd into the home DevZero directory. So this directory is actually backed by essentially a block device, a single volume which supports single attach reading and writing. But in DevZero, there's documentation, so I'll just reference it over here so you can go and read up on it after. We also support creating volumes, etc. And so, similarly, in the web UI, you can go and create your own volumes and then attach those into any of these Kubernetes clusters or any of the pods running inside any of these clusters. Why is that important? Going back here, K9S. If any of these pods that we are looking at, you wanted to have some sort of persistent storage, so to make it more resilient to restarts, getting moved between nodes, etc., all of that will just be supported out of the box for you. Over the next few weeks, we will actually be releasing a few more things. Right now, obviously, this volume that I'm talking about, it does support multi-attach reading and writing. So you can mount it to multiple pods, etc. It's a networked file system, very similar to what cloud providers like AWS sell as EFS. We just like supporting various multi-attach sort of modes, so that whenever you're running in a single DevZero region, arbitrary containerized workloads can just go and get access to each of those volumes. Similarly, we'll have some sort of, again, Bazel does support using things like a remote S3 compatible API. So we will soon launch some stuff that covers those types of storage needs. So yeah, this was a light overview into DevZero, how you do all of these cluster things. Any engineer, for whatever task they want, they can just go and create their own cluster, go and remove it whenever they want. All of these are very exposed via a bunch of REST APIs accessible through our CLI. We see a lot of people interact with DevZero also through directly the API interfaces. To make it like fit better with their internal tooling and processes. Either of those flows just work just fine. So yeah, the only thing takeaway for in order to interact with all of these things, we do have this WireGuard network layer underneath, and we are also in parallel working on ways to make it a little bit easier for folks, because for a variety of reasons, I don't have admin on my local computer, I can't get root, etc., etc. For those people, being able to install and run the DevZero CLI gets a little challenging from time to time. So we are doing a bunch of things to make that process quite a bit easier also. Yeah, I have already gone a little longer than I had intended to. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Don't see anything yet, but again, I have missed questions in this interface before. Okay. I think I've waited for a little bit of time. Yeah, if you're either here live and you have some question, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Debo, or over email. I'm Debo at devzero.io. Yeah, or if you're receiving a recording of this thing afterwards and you have some questions, you know how to reach me. Awesome. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.